Today, Israeli troops pushed deeper into Gaza City, part of an operation Israel says is designed to seize Gaza's largest city and defeat Hamas. Dozens more Palestinians were killed today in Israeli attacks. Health officials in Gaza announced earlier today that more than 65,000 Palestinians have now been killed in nearly 2 years of war. And a coalition of leading aid groups urged the international community to take stronger measures to stop the offensive after a commission of UN experts accused Israel of committing genocide. Here's Nick Schifrin with more.
An independent international commission attached to the UN's Human Rights Council released its report this week that accuses Israel of an ongoing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. The UN's Genocide Convention defines genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, and cites as examples killing, injuring, inflicting conditions calculated to bring about physical destruction, preventing births, or transferring children. The commission accuses Israel of committing at least 4 of those 5 acts, and that statements made by Israeli authorities are, quote, direct evidence of genocidal intent. Then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant here on October 9th, 2023.
We are ordering a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly.
To discuss the report, I first turned to Craig Mokhabir. He's an international human rights lawyer and former senior UN official, and he joins me now from New York. Craig Mokhabir, thanks very much. Welcome to the News Hour. This charge of genocide has been made before. How is this report different than previous documents that made this accusations, and why is this significant?
Well, this report is the result of 2 years of internationally mandated investigations, 80 pages of detailed facts and legal analysis, and all conducted by a panel of very highly qualified, highly respected international human rights experts and jurists. And of course, it follows upon earlier findings of genocide by the UN Special Rapporteur, virtually the entire community of international human rights lawyers. We've never seen a consensus as clear as this one, and now this additional report on top of that, a very serious, officially mandated report, I think is the final piece in the puzzle of accountability that people have been trying to build for 2 years of genocide.
Israel, of course, denies that it's committing genocide. If anything, it blames Hamas on committing genocide, stating Hamas's charter. And let's talk about intent, which, of course, is what makes genocide legally unique, but also very difficult to prove. Israeli officials have disputed the argument in this report that senior officials' statement somehow prove intent. The Israeli argument is that some of those statements were taken out of context and that they are made by politicians, not the executors of the military campaign. And the people who are executing the military campaign are inside the IDF, and they follow international humanitarian law. What's your response to that argument?
Well, that's not a very convincing argument. In fact, it's an unusual argument. Normally, the argument that is made is, well, those people who made those statements are marginal characters. In this case, we're talking about the president, the prime minister, at least 7 members of the Israeli cabinet, senior military commanders, commanders on the ground, and all the way down the chain of command. And what the commission has shown, and others before them have shown, is that these statements are made. They are then repeated down the chain of command, and in fact, they are perpetrated on the ground with a genocidal fury that is undeniable. They looked at every aspect of the situation on the ground to align the facts with the statements and to conclude that indeed the intent is genocide and the acts are genocide.
Intent can also be proven by a pattern of conduct on the ground. And in fact, Israel points at what Hamas is doing inside Gaza and says the report does not take into account how Hamas fights using hospitals as bases, which I have personally witnessed in Gaza, and fighting from tunnels underneath civilian infrastructure. Doesn't the circumstance of this war change the assessment of Israel's conduct?
It does not. Even if the premise were true, which is often proven not to be true. But let's say that a combatant is alleged to be in a hospital or surrounded by civilians in a refugee shelter. That does not relieve the responsibility of Israel to respect international law. They are still bound by the principles of precaution and distinction and proportionality, respect for protected persons. The systematic targeting of virtually every hospital in Gaza, the targeting of schools and churches and mosques and refugee shelters and community facilities, of aid warehouses and aid distribution points. There is no way that they can justify this either legally or in fact by simply using the magic word Hamas or the magic word terrorist. That does not have that effect in international law.
And finally, the commission today accuses Israel of intentionally using starvation as a method of warfare. But Israel argues it has allowed 2 million tons of aid into the Gaza Strip, over 1 ton of aid per person, and that it's Hamas who's actually stealing the aid in order to pay its fighters.
If it is true that aid is being allowed in, which is denied by all those responsible for distributing aid, except for the Israelis and their mechanisms themselves, somehow people are still starving to death, and somehow we had last month a declaration of famine in Gaza. There is famine in Gaza. People are starving to death, and that is the result of the intentional policies of the Israeli regime.
Craig Mokhabir, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And for the other perspective, I spoke earlier today to Dr. Eran Shamir-Borer, director of the Israel Democracy Institute Center for Security and Democracy, and the former head of the Israel Defense Forces International Law Department. He was also a member of Israel's defense team at the International Court of Justice. Eran Shamir-Borer, thanks very much. Welcome to the News Hour. As we've been discussing, the Genocide Convention lists a series of acts that must be committed, quote, with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The report says that Israel's intent is proven through statements. Then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant saying Israel is, quote, fighting human animals, President Isaac Herzog saying the entire Palestinian nation was responsible, and others. Do those statements not prove the intent to destroy?
I think the report is wrong about the law, is wrong about the facts, and also wrong about the methodology. So first and foremost, these statements it's like an effort of cherry picking, very selective quotations, completely ignoring the context or many other statements by the same individuals. And also they fail to remind, that the IDF is not conducting itself based on statements of this or other politician, but it's a very disciplined military operating, under very clear and written decisions of Israeli war cabinet, basing its operational decisions on standing operating procedures and rules of engagement. And these are that statements, even though, some of them I think are highly regrettable, some of them even reprehensible statements, I would say. But that's not the way that militaries in democracies, including in Israel, operate. It's just not the way that militaries function.
Intent can also be established by a pattern of conduct on the ground, and the report argues the IDF has conducted indiscriminate bombing. The UN says 78% of Gaza's structures have been damaged or destroyed. Is that not proof of the intent to destroy?
First of all, because when assessing the legality of the conduct of militaries, you need information about what were the operational justifications for a specific attack or a specific decision to destruct, for instance, a specific facility, right? And the committee, they had no access to this information. They only rely on information released by Hamas itself. And when you look into specific incidents, they only, rely on very partial data. They never mention, what was the target of the strike. For instance, they refer in one of the incidents they mentioned to an attack on the European hospital, as they mentioned. Now, Israel already released extensive information that it wasn't attacking the hospital. It was actually attacking the target, was actually military infrastructure underneath the hospital. Mohammed Sinwar, no less than the head of Hamas, died as a result of this attack. He was the target of the attack. The report simply, fails to mention any of this and try to depict a reality as if Israel is just purposefully attacking medical facilities. That's totally not the case. You can't assess the legality of Israeli actions without actually also assessing Hamas's conduct. And this is the conduct of the terror organizations that carried out attacks against Israeli civilians, that booby traps its own military facility, its own civilian infrastructure, that shields itself with its own civilians, that built, dug a very extensive tunnels underneath Gaza. And I think that's, it's outrageous. It's unprofessional, and it's also a test, I think, to the partiality and bias of the committee.
The report makes a separate legal argument that Israel has blocked humanitarian aid. There was a time when Israel allowed 0 trucks in. Israel this week has announced additional steps to try and let trucks in, but humanitarian officials in the region tell us even today that the number of trucks getting in is no more than 100. That is 1/6 the number that the UN says is necessary to feed Gaza. So has Israel not blocked humanitarian aid from going into Gaza?
For a very long time, for over a year and a half, Israel allowed and facilitated any aid to go into Gaza. It's true that after the ceasefire, when there was a huge storage, supply of aid inside Gaza, then Israel halted the aid for a while. But again, the report totally ignores the reality in which Hamas simply steals significant portions of this aid, commandeering some of the aid going in, and in this way, actually sustaining its war effort against Israel.
Eran Shamir-Borer, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.